Hello, I'm Paula Bird, and I'm a Suzuki teacher here in Central Texas. I've been teaching for a very long time, so I have a lot of experience in this area. I also teach at one of the local universities, and I teach students of all ages, and I've worked with many different parents of many different families. I've spent a long time with my parents on this Suzuki journey, so I hope I have something to offer for you. I'm the author of the Teach Suzuki blog and podcast on iTunes, and that's where you can find me. I think that review is maybe one of the most difficult concepts for parents and students to understand, and maybe even teachers. I always like to look behind things to figure out the reason why people do or don't do things. So I've spent quite a lot of time on this subject. I've tried to understand what review should look like, why we should do it, why it's a good thing, how to do it, and then most importantly, why do parents have such a hard time doing this? First of all, what is review? Why do it? Remember when Dr. Suzuki first started teaching way back before World War II, he had a theory about how we learn language. And he took that theory and he taught his students with it. Now science is beginning to corroborate the work and theories that Dr. Suzuki articulated. So, what is review? Review actually has several parts to its definition. Let's look at the basic definition. Most folks will tell you that review means to play something that you have already learned. That's a kind of review, but there is so much more richness to the word. Most formal uses of the word review imply that there will be a close scrutiny or looking at something for the purpose of maybe changing something. For example, a company might do a comprehensive review of its strategies regarding marketing. The company does this kind of review with the idea that there might be something to change. Is there something you should change? That's a good question to consider when doing a review. And so is the first part about playing something you know. So here's a summary of the two basic questions that I like to ask regarding review. Now, how would these two questions work for us? Let's take an example. Let's ask the teacher first what he or she wants us to review. Always a good place to start is to ask the teacher. Let's assume the teacher asked our child and me, the parent, to review Go Tell Aunt Rhody. Okay, let's also assume that we were given no other information about how to do our review, just to go ahead and do a review this week. So let's see how that would work in the context of our two questions. Question number 1, do you know it? If my child plays Go Tell Aunt Rhody and then stumbles in several places, then the answer to that first question is no, my child does not know it. Or perhaps my child learned it once upon a time but has forgotten some things now. So as a parent, I will take that information from that review we just did and then plug that into a practice plan for the remainder of this week. I might add some extra practice this week on the parts that my child struggled to play, or perhaps I will have to spend some more time relearning this song or that part of the song. I might actually have to dig out my previous notes from the lessons that we had on Aunt Rhody. Are you going to tell me that you have no notes from the lesson? Don't worry, we'll talk a little bit more about that. There is a better recipe for review than the hit and miss kind of variety that we're talking about now. So let's say that the child plays through Go Tell Aunt Rhody and everything goes smoothly. Okay, gets the right fingering, right bowing. Now I would begin to look at question number 2. Do I need to change something? The answer to this second question is much more interesting. I can't just run through the song one time and answer this kind of question with any kind of thoughtful consideration. I need to take into account what we are currently working on in lessons. If my child's teacher has spent time working on better bow holds or straight bows or maybe using more bow, then I need to see how these new skills or aspects of my child's lessons can now be incorporated into my child's playing of Aunt Rhody. Now, when we play through the review of Aunt Rhody, we need to consider whether we need to change something about the way we first learned it or now play it in order to be sure to include the new things that we have learned in lessons. I frequently remind my students and parents that they are not the same people they were a day ago, a week ago, or even a book ago. So I expect Book 5 students to play Twinkles and look very differently than they did when they played them in Book 1. And if a student is continuing to play in Book 5 the same way that they did when they first learned something in Book 1, then we stop and we revisit that issue so that they understand they should be continually growing and expanding on the knowledge that they had gained in Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4. It should all be building on the foundation of those earlier books and then expanding as we go through the repertoire into more advanced repertoire. So why is review important? This is where the science comes in. But don't worry, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I do want to talk about a few important things. First, when we learn things, we take in information through our senses, and it's taken along synapses in our brain along a neural pathway, and the information is then stored temporarily in our short-term memory. Now, along the way, it's going to later be shunted to our long-term memory, but before that happens, several other things might happen. The information we take in might be kind of sketchy. It might be degraded later due to health issues or environmental factors. So we all know how that works with computers, but it works that way in our brain sometimes too. So the more important thing to note is that when we don't reinforce the information that we have taken in and put in our short-term memory, it may not actually get completely processed very well into the long-term memory place in our brain. So there are actually cells in the brain too, and I'm going to butcher this name, I'll bet, microglial cells. I call them the brain gardeners. They go around your brain and they snip off any unused or underused synapses. So it's very important that we use as much of our brain and our neural pathways and our synapses as we can so that we can avoid having things snipped away later. I'm not a scientist, and I don't need to be a scientist in order to understand that the more I use parts of my brain, the less likely I am to lose the things that I'm storing in it. I think we all understand that. I like to tell my students that brains are like leaky buckets. They have a hole in them, and so we have to keep filling them to keep them constantly filled and used. So, have I convinced you of the value of review? Because I'm ready to move on to the most important part, and that is how to do the recipe for a very successful review. Oh, wait. There are a few of you out there who may not have bought into the importance of review. Well, let me give you 2 examples and see if I might be able to convince you a little bit further. First of all, let's assume that your neighbor's child is now turning 16 and is going to go and get his driver's license. Okay, now how many hours do you think he should practice learning to drive before he gets that license? Do you want him just to learn the mechanics of driving and then go get the license? Or would you prefer that he spend a few more hours reviewing and solidifying the information that he has learned so that he becomes a better driver when he takes that license test? What about doctors and surgeons? How do you feel about that? Would you like them to get their medical license as soon as they've learned how to perform the surgery? Or would you feel a little better if they spent a little bit more time, perhaps years, learning how to perform that surgery and maybe practicing that surgery several times? I mean, which one would you like before they get that license? Oh, come on, you're probably thinking, how can I compare learning a musical instrument with driving a car or performing surgery? Well, in my mind, learning to do things is the same. No matter what the activity is, we all learn in the same way. I picked those 2 examples because I thought they would make more of an impression on you and make the discussion easier about understanding what it comes to putting value to the review component. It serves the same purpose in all these 3 examples. So we've talked about the two basic questions that come from the basic definition of what a review is. We've talked about the importance of doing review. Now, how do we do it? That's the hard part, right? So, first of all, let me suggest that you actually spend time doing the review and stop trying to think of ways to make it easier or go faster. It can be easier, but sometimes I think we waste just a little too much time in general trying to make things easier, faster, more convenient. Why not just take the time that we need to do a good job and make that the best reward for our efforts? But if you insist, then let me show you my recipe for review. I really think it's quite simple, although it does take a few minutes here and there to actually do some planning and advance preparation for it. It's like having the same thing for dinner every day or even every week. I mean, it works fine for a while, but then you need some kind of variation or change. So let's look at how to do it. And before we look at doing it, let me suggest that we get a few ingredients put together first. These are our tools. If we were making a real recipe, we would gather all of our ingredients together first. And it's the same thing with review. And here are some things that I suggest as possible ingredients. Magnetic fishing pole game, orange juice can lids, popsicle and other craft sticks, beads and other counters, plastic chip counters, bells, buzzers, and timers, blank playing cards or index cards, spinners, dice and other colorful spinners. Now that we have these tools on hand, let's get started with the review recipe, and let me offer 3 possible plans. Let's start with the simple plan. The simple plan is to go through 1 to 3 songs a day with a particular goal that comes from something the teacher suggested at the lesson regarding practice or review goals. So remember when I talked about the information that a parent can gather at lessons? Did the teacher work on a particular point during the lesson, such as having straight bows or playing with longer bows or distributing them in a certain way? I know in an ideal world, the teacher would have written down everything so that the parent and the student would know exactly what to do during home practices. And yes, there are some teachers out there who are able to take the time to do that. I've done it myself. However, I would prefer not to do it, and I will tell you very quickly why. Because if I have to do it, that means I have to cut short the teaching time so that I allow enough time at the end to make a good job of writing down the information. It's hard for me to remember everything that we did when we were having the heat of a moment, when we're having a wonderful lesson going on, for me to remember exactly how we got to that point and everything that occurred, and sometimes little details will escape me because I'm so focused on where we are going next. I'm thinking of so many things at the same time. It would really help me if a parent would be my scribe and just take notes of the things that the parent is observing and then ask questions if we need to fill in anything at the end. There's nothing more disheartening to me as a teacher than having the next student walk into the room and realize that it's time to wrap up and I didn't allow enough time to do a very good job of wrapping up on the notes. So here's my simple plan. Do 1 to 3 songs a day. Keep a list of all the songs that the student has learned and then play the 4 most recently learned ones because those probably aren't still really learned yet. So you're still polishing and mastering new things. So I'd say the 4 most recent songs are a good place to go. And then go through the previously learned songs 1 to 3 per day. And our purpose here is to keep the memory of how to play the songs alive in our mind and our fingers. And also, any new skills that are learned at lessons can be used in these older songs as well. So, any kind of new skill, it's easier to introduce them to the child, the student, if it's done in a song that's much more familiar. And then don't forget to ask the child's teacher for review points if you don't remember them. Now, let's take a look at the surprise plan. The surprise plan will include an element of randomness or surprise in the review process. For example, put all the names of the songs on craft sticks or orange juice can lids, plastic counters, numbered fish game, some other numbered or colored list. Then the child draws an item or number or throws the dice and randomly selects the review songs for that day's practice plan. Or perhaps there are slips of paper in an envelope. I had a student once who liked to put all her names of songs in an envelope, and then she would go through the envelope at the beginning of her review week and pull out all the ones that were her least favorites. And then that way she knew that as the week progressed, she was only going to be doing her absolute most favorite ones. That's a way to help a child, or that's a way for a child to decide a way to help do the review, and it's a way that interests and motivates the child. Now let's take a look at the thoughtful plan. The thoughtful plan will be a specific targeted review that works closely with specific goals that are directed by the child's teacher. For example, when one of my students learns the Two Grenadiers, I might ask that student to then also review a particular minuet in Book 1 because they have similar left-hand skills and both of them will be playing off of each other. I might ask the student to review perpetual motion from Book 1 in order to introduce or perfect or refine a better bowing skill that will be used then in the Sights Concertos in Book 4. These are examples of a thoughtful plan. And I actually think this is probably the best way to do a review in general, but it is a little more time consuming because there's more preparation involved. And you may need the expertise of the teacher for sure to make sure you're on the right path on this. Now, simple plans are good plans for students in review when we're just starting out in lessons, and also for those times when life gets pretty busy or you just don't have the time to really do a kind of review. And surprise plans are very useful when the holidays come around or you just kind of need a little variety for a change, or maybe you are busy that day too and it's just an easier way to do it. I just ask that parents are very mindful of the kind of review plan they use and that they actually do it for a particular purpose rather than just doing it to play a game because it makes practices go simpler, quicker, faster, more convenient. Remember, a little more thoughtful and mindfulness is better. But how I construct the thoughtful plan, here's what I suggest. I like the index card system, but you could use a different system if you prefer. But they have index cards that are rather large, and I suggest that you take one index card per song, and then start gathering all the notes that you can from lessons, group classes, institutes, workshops, wherever you see this song being used or noted, that you write a little note about that activity or game or review point, teaching point, and keep it on the card. And that way your card system will have all of the songs and all of the teaching points as you go along. So when you have to do a review, you just pull out the card for that song and there you go. You have a long list of things that you could be addressing in a review. Now, a thoughtful plan will rely on parents taking notes. Remember that? And did you notice that I said that you could take notes during group classes and institutes and workshops? You can even watch another child's lesson and take notes about a particular song as well. All I ask is that you just note what's happening in the lesson. Just make an observation, make a little bullet point in your journal, use a bullet journal if you'd like, and just make a little note of what's occurring in the lesson and then use that to put in your note-taking system. These form the basis of your review plan. Now, how will that thoughtful plan then work every week? Each card contains the relevant information that you need about that song. It has ideas that you've gathered from many different sources. You can even go on the internet. You can go visit blogs. I have one. You could go listen to podcasts. I have one of those too. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, and all these things provide information about teaching points, learning points, and my favorite place to go is the Suzuki Association of the Americas website. They have a lovely discussion forum, and you can ask a question anytime about something and you will almost instantly get responses from that. That is suzukieassociation.org. Now let me offer you the best possible advice concerning review. Are you ready? You want to write this down? That's right. Do your review first thing. If you're a teacher, I suggest that you have the student play through the assigned review at first time at lessons as well. I suggest this because then you will actually get the review done. It's a great way to warm up the fingers, the mind, and the memory before doing work on new things. And when students play review first in lessons, they come to understand or realize that nothing else is going to happen at lessons until the review has finished. And if the student or parent has slacked off a little bit on the review program, then lessons will consist of a lot of review until the parent and the student get back on track and put a little bit more time and effort getting the review program under control. So there you have it. That is the recipe for review. So let me quickly summarize everything that I discussed today and covered in this video. Remember, we talked about review being something that we know and are looking at for the purpose that we might have to change something. So we asked two important questions. Ask these two questions every time you review something, and you will be able to formulate your own review program. Make sure you know it, and then look for ways to add things in from new material and skills that you are learning. Remember the 3 review plans. And remember the most important thing. And that's it. Voila! That is the recipe for review. If you need more information or help, you can go to the Suzuki Association of the Americas and their discussion forum. You can find that at suzukieassociation.org. You can visit many blogs and podcasts. You can find me on the Teach Suzuki blog at teachsuzuki.blogspot.com, or you can find me on the podcast on iTunes or Google Play at teachsuzuki.com. You can send me an email at paulabirdviolin@gmail.com. And I've really enjoyed talking with you today. Happy practicing, happy reviewing.